The following feature presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Welcome to Star Warsologies, the podcast about science and other academic fields of study seen in Star Wars. I'm one of your co-hosts, Melissa Miller. I am a science writer and recently had a couple articles in Star Wars Insider magazine.
Hi, I'm James Floyd. I'm your other co-host. I'm a freelance writer for Star Wars Insider magazine. This episode, Star Warsologies, is going to chat about vehicles like X-Wings, speeders, and everyone's favorite hunk of junk, the Millennium Falcon. Our guest expert today is Maria Romano de León, a curator at the San Diego Automotive Museum. Hey, Maria.
Hey, how's it going?
And those of you who listen to all of our extra bonus Fast and Furious episodes might remember Maria as our car and car culture expert from that as well. So we're excited to have her back for Star Wars.
Well, I'm super excited to be back.
Tell us about your work as a curator and what makes a car worthy enough to come into a museum.
You know, you'd be surprised at what makes it worth it, because it's like anything that's worthy of study is worth being shown, I think. So because cars are cultural objects, it's like literally anything you could write something about, because everything has a significance, you know. Currently, I'm trying to collect like 70s and 80s cars, actually, because I think that that's an area that is becoming more scarce. The commonplace becomes rare, right? Eventually. So we have like 2 or 3 exhibits every year that we change out, and we always try to tie it to the region of San Diego too.
So it sounds like you're a big Star Wars fan. When in your life did that start? Does it sort of go hand in hand with your interest in cars, or?
Not really. Like, I think about this because I actually just watched, the original Star Wars Episode 4. I just watched it with my daughters, who are 7 and 4. And it was like a big deal for me because I first watched it with my dad when I was about like 6 or 7. I was excited that you guys write for Star Wars Insider because I was a subscriber when I was like a teenager, not for a long time. Yeah, I mean, I don't know when it started. I guess probably the first time I watched it. And then I would say just my ability to follow anything besides work and kids kind of dropped off about, 7 or 8 years ago. So I think I'm out of I'm out of the loop a little bit.
Yeah, funny how that happened.
So it sounds like you're mostly an original trilogy fan, but if you also seen the prequels and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, prequels were a big deal when they came out, right? Like I was in middle school, so I was very into it.
Well, let's take a look at some of our favorite speeders and ships. What do you think a speeder or a vehicle of any kind says about the character of the person who drives or flies it?
Well, I always like to start stuff like this talking about how vehicles in film play a couple roles. Sometimes they're like a character themselves. Sometimes they actually talk. And then sometimes they're an extension of a character who's like a human or whatever. So sometimes they're just a plot device too, right? They're something you barely notice. I think in Star Wars, they occupy an interesting space right between like character extension and like world building. You almost do forget what they're doing. They're kind of in the background, I think, a lot, and not maybe the main focus of the scene. But I do think that George Lucas's love of cars shows very strongly in the way that chase scenes are done, like fight scenes. Any space shooting stuff going on is very like betrays his interest in vehicles. So I'm not sure if that's always a character extension, but it's definitely like a thing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I still haven't seen American Graffiti, but like I know that that's in George Lucas's DNA and stuff like that. So I never really thought about it. I mean,
and that is like a real car movie, American Graffiti.
Thinking about like the culture for each kind of vehicle. I mean, it's really obvious even to a non-car person like myself that, the Rebels and the Imperial ships look really different, right? Like the Rebels all, it might just be that they're older, or they're patched together or whatever, but there's just a whole different style to that versus like everything in the Empire is black and shiny and perfect. And that does say something about the government.
Yeah, that's such a good point, actually, because it's not only a really quick visual cue of like who's who, which really matters, I think, in a movie where that can be confusing, but it's also really reinforces that good evil paradigm and like that money, no money, like that scrappiness versus like an empire, which is sort of like a weird, almost colonial narrative too, I think. But then, of course, everyone knows too, there's definitely like World War II themes in that. I think it's really well known that Lucas was inspired by fascism, Nazism when he created the Empire, which gives an illusion of like everything being organized, engineered properly, clean, right? Whereas the rebels were kind of trying to pull everything together from a bunch of disparate parts.
Yeah.
That's for sure like evident in the matchiness, I think, or just the cleanliness, you know, and everything about that was really intentional. I think we know that too. Any behind the scenes thing you watch was like, they were very specific about how things looked and sounded, right?
Yep, they have lots of straight lines for things. And then you look at the Millennium Falcon as kind of like, yeah, it's a cobbled together piece of junk. Kind of got the guts on the outside that you see all the bits and bobs on the outside. And it's like,
yeah,
go to fix it. They're on the outside of the ship eating at it.
Yeah. It's like a professionalism thing too, right? Like the Imperial ships look like designed. They have like an artistic aspect to them instead of just like the inside of the Falcon, for example, is, you know, dumpy. Yeah.
Right. Did you watch the movie Solo?
No, I didn't watch. I literally haven't seen anything new.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Here's a fun fact, though, is that they show the Millennium Falcon when it's still Lando's.
Oh, really?
And it's the same ship, obviously, but it's like clean. And there's like a theme. And like all of the stuff is like a matching like mustard yellow color and stuff.
Oh, like that's cute.
Yeah, that it's like Lando takes much better care of it. That he's like, yes, this is an extension of my fashion style.
Yeah.
Whereas Han is like, whatever, I'll just wipe this smudge off a little bit and hope that that's good enough to sit on.
Well, that is very indicative of their characters, right? Like Lando's fastidious. Lando looks good, obviously, right?
Right.
Han Solo is kind of doesn't care as much about his appearance, obviously. And those are definitely two types of car people as well, you know?
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that example until just now. The other fun fact about it, you don't necessarily need to watch Solo, but is that there's a whole room, and I wonder what Han Solo uses it for, but there's a whole room of just his capes, right? Just Lando's closet.
Lando's cape room.
Amazing.
And there's a lot of capes in there.
He has a cape for every occasion. That's really good. I thought if it's mustard yellow, that's a nice nod, I think, to the 70s era too, because that's such a car interior color from that time period.
Well, we could talk about Luke's land speeder. Like, how do you see that kind of as an extension of him?
So that, I think, speaks to this idea of that George Lucas was also interested in, because we know he races speeders too. I remember reading a long time ago that there's parts of the speeder as Luke has it was not intended to be complete. It's like modified, like it has a fairing off of it or something. And that kind of indicates that it's between maybe a motorcycle and like a hot rod that he races with his friends for fun. But it's just a thing he had that was a tool. So that's this kind of a universal thing, I think, of young men who are bored, like racing things in their spare time, which is how almost all racing divisions started in the US. You know, your NASCAR, your NHRA, that's all just like guys racing stuff. In that way, he's like a bored teenager, but also somebody that is good at what he does. So he obviously was good at racing stuff.
No, and you're right. It does sort of set up his character too. You know, he can fix all the droids and he can fly every ship once he gets into the Rebel fleet and stuff like that. And I didn't really think about the fact that they sort of tell us that early on.
Yeah, he's like a hot rodder type person, but in a galaxy far away. Star Wars is made of like parables that you already know so that you can understand what's going on, even though the setting is foreign, quote unquote. So Luke's a real classic archetype of that, I think. And that's in American Graffiti too.
So do you have a favorite ship, something, or did you have like the action figures and the ships and stuff like that? Did you have a favorite one to play with?
The first action figure I got was Luke in a speeder. So the speeder I have was my uncle's from the 70s, which is really cool. I actually really like TIE fighters aesthetically. I think they look really Art Deco, which is sort of a design. This is all me. I never read this anywhere. I think it's like a visual cue of like being organized. You know, because Art Deco is very symmetrical in terms of like architecture. But I just think they're really pleasingly designed. I know people kind of make fun of them as like not being airworthy.
No, but I'd never considered them as Art Deco, but you're right. It's got the symmetry, it's got, you know, the hexagons, and so it's got angles, but also curves.
Yeah, it's got like a real vertical orientation too that's really like Art Deco to me. You know how it's just like upward all the time? And then that little thing in the middle reminds me of when a lot of Art Deco architecture is kind of tied with a design. And the window of the cockpit is very like pretty to me, how it has like the little rays kind of coming out of a central screen. Yeah.
James, did you have a favorite ship? I'm trying to think if I do.
Well, when I was a kid, I had the land speeder toy too, so that sticks with me. Yeah, I never had an X-wing or the Falcon or a TIE fighter or anything. So most of my adventures were on the ground. I did get the Star Destroyer playset, but it didn't look like a Star Destroyer very much. But yeah, like the general Star Destroyer shape, and it was just really cool because it was this big iconic triangle wedge, and also it was easy to draw. You got Star Destroyers and X-wings and TIE fighters, and they're all very basic shapes.
Yeah, I was just noticing in my background here, I have my action figure X-Wing and TIE Fighter that I found in my mom's storage unit a couple of years ago.
Oh, that's so cool.
And what I like about the X-Wing is that it had different stickers that you could put on it. So I think the one that I have on my bookshelf is like the busted stickers, the like after it sank into the swamp stickers.
Yeah, the crash stickers.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I probably like the X-Wings just because like I want to hang out with R2-D2 as much as possible. And so like chit-chatting with R2-D2 in an X-Wing sounds like an awesome road trip to me.
He's in your head the whole time, right?
Right, exactly.
I was going to say, yeah, R2-D2 lives rent-free in Melissa's head.
Anyway, right, exactly.
So he'd literally be in your head.
Exactly. R2 is co-pilot is a bumper sticker I definitely need. So, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, then there's the Millennium Falcon. I like the running joke of everyone referring to it as like a hunk of junk. James can probably remember everything it was disparagingly called over the years, but
let's see, garbage, bucket of bolts. Yeah,
it's like 90% Princess Leia too. She's really mean about it.
Yeah, she's mean, but she's got the quick wit, so she's calling it something new every time.
Yeah, every time.
Yeah, but I mean, it gets them around. It's functional, even if it's a hunk of junk.
Mostly, like the hyperdrive's not working. It powers down, and Han has to hit it to get it come back on. I mean, that's not something you necessarily want with your car.
No, but it's totally a thing that happens, I don't know where the battery is in the Millennium Falcon, but it's like, that's a kind of a cute car reference, I think.
Percussive maintenance
Percussive maintenance, yeah.
If the machine's not working right, hit it or kick it, and, half the time it'll start working again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious now, is there anything recognizable as like a car part?
There's a lot of plane car overlap, but just the central idea of having a windshield, essentially, like the cockpit with a screen that you can actually see, which is funny in space because of how little they probably could actually see out of just a window in front of you, That's very much an Earth car or plane thing, right?
It's true. I never thought of that. The TIE fighters, you just look out the front, which with those wings, you're not getting much peripheral vision.
None, like no peripheral vision. And then the X-Wings too, like I don't know how they could see anything with the helmet.
He actually has to like pick up his head and look behind him. It's like they don't even have rear view mirrors.
There's no visibility in those. There's also not, honestly, probably in that kind of plane either. Like a World War II era plane. But at least theoretically in the technological landscape of Star Wars, they had more stuff to orient them, I don't know. I always think it's funny in the Millennium Falcon specifically, though, because you can see where the cockpit is and you can't see the whole back of the ship in the cockpit.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true. With the Millennium Falcon, it being over to one side and so limited. I hadn't ever really thought about that.
Yeah, could you imagine parking it and you're just like, I got to know exactly how wide the ship is on the side I can't see. Otherwise, I'm going to be like scraping stuff the whole time on the left.
And then you think of a little like backup camera, does it have like...
It has curb feelers. That's what it has.
No, that's what I'm picturing.
Or is it like a ship going into a port now where they have like, the port staff actually dock it? Is it like that where they do it with a tractor beam or something? I don't know.
Tractor beam is definitely really useful for docking.
I'm thinking about that now. It's something they wouldn't have thought of in 1977 necessarily. But yeah, like I am addicted to the backup camera in my car because it's there and it's an option. And I've been in people's cars that have like newer, fancier cars where it like tells you, how far you have, or it has like an overhead angle of you as you're parking.
Isn't that crazy? That's an awesome crazy. It's just really cool that we're living there now,
Well, and I never really thought about how it's different because, like, I don't know if you watch Star Trek, but it's not a window they're looking at. It's a screen.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking, too.
Yeah.
And so much happens there, but nothing, like, out of the actual window, right? The windows are, like, the 10 forward windows that you can't really see anything out of.
Right. Yeah.
But then, like, on the Star Destroyer, they got, like, windows all across the front, and they can look out. And then, of course, the A-Wing can fly right in, and they're like, we can see that. And then they actually dive out of the way. Like, it's going to make a big difference to them.
Those Star Destroyers really remind me of like being on bigger ships or whatever, like the container ship I've been on or something like that. Having that big, tall bridge, at the top, being able to, walk around and look out all sides or whatever.
Yeah, they're like a space aircraft carrier, right? Like just that kind of ship where they can dock and take off in the middle of nowhere. We already know too that all the fighters that live on them, they can't go that far. They have to stay by the ship.
Yeah, it says something about your government when they don't trust you enough with the ship that you would just, I'm going to go defect with it. Or it's like, nope, we're going to make it cheap and easy. You're just as replaceable as the ship, which has no shields.
But also they have logistics, right? They have presumably a supply chain so they could just keep doing it. Unlike the rebels that seem like they're always struggling with that.
Yep, it's like we got to just fix what we have because we don't know when we're getting another one.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm trying to think of other like land-based vehicles. There's like the AT-AT and what I call the ATSIT. I know everyone else just spells it out. I'll get hate mail for the ATST.
Those speeders that are on the Endor moon.
Bikes.
I actually really like those walkers though too, because they've always reminded me ever since I learned about it of, when Alexander the Great used like elephants in his ground operations. Obviously there were only really ground operations at that time. But it always reminded me of like elephants because it's so intimidating. And that's like a trope in all of war movies, right? Like having a big thing, like a big elephant.
No, exactly. It is the war elephant, that it's huge and imposing and it crunches the ground as it walks. It's very much about fear as well as being a large weapon platform.
Yeah.
On Earth, like Alexander the Great and in like Thailand, they did use elephants in warfare. And I'm wondering if they developed the run around it with a cable strategy. Or was it just like, dude, that thing is crazy. Let's not go near it. Oh, they're shooting arrows off the top of it. I've been hit.
Yeah. Right. No, I never really thought about that as what the AT-AT sort of represents, but it makes perfect sense.
I'm still caught up on ATSTA or ATSIT.
It's not that confusing. If as a child, that's not what I said. That would be weird. If the one is called AT-AT, then ATST is ATSIT. It's not that weird. We add vowels to acronyms all the time. But yeah, that's one I say, and I know I immediately get a reaction. But it's like, I've literally been doing that since before I could remember, so I'm not changing anytime soon.
All right.
This is the last episode of the podcast. James refuses to be a part of this anymore.
No. We will just never talk about this again. But let's talk about the speeder bikes on Endor. How do you feel like they would really work?
They kind of function like motorcycles, I guess, a little bit in the scene. Although the whole point is that they're off the ground, right? Because it's like a big forest floor. I don't know. It's like kind of your classic sort of chase scene with bikes that you see in movies a lot.
How fast do you think you could reasonably go through a forest and not hit every single tree?
I don't know. You think they'd have guidance technology or something? Because also, don't the guys on it have like helmets that cover their eyes? So like, I don't know.
Yeah, that blind forward vision. You can only look forward.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, one hopes or assumes maybe. I know we've learned more about stormtrooper vision and what's actually inside their helmet. But yeah, like if there was a sort of video game simulator, tracking something, that would make sense that they could get around without just constantly running into trees. But it does seem very lucky that they live as long as they live in that chase scene. Not just the shortest chase scene ever,
Yeah, they just immediately fall off and get a concussion.
Oh, and that's why we don't see a whole lot of movies with motorcycle forest chase scenes where the trees are like that dense.
Yeah, I guess you don't see jungle chase scenes that often anyway, right? I just think of like Tarzan style where you're like in the trees.
Yeah, I started laughing because the only other one I could think of was that really stupid one in one of the newer Indiana Jones movies where Shia LaBeouf ends up swinging from the trees as part of it. And I was just like, oh no.
Well, so we know it doesn't work.
Well, we know Paplu, the Ewok, he gets off of his speeder bike by grabbing onto a vine and just swinging up.
Right. That's right.
So it can be done.
I feel like especially by Ewoks, though, because they're good at the forest, right?
Yeah, exactly. That makes enough sense to me and looked much cooler doing something like that than Shia LaBeouf did in Indiana Jones.
So much cooler.
Well, I know you said you haven't seen Book of Boba Fett, but I sent you the video of the chase scene. I wanted to bring it up in our vehicle discussion because it's the most like divisive thing I could think about in terms of vehicles in Star Wars. Man, people hated these like shiny, bright colored speeder bikes in the new series. And, I was curious if you had any insight into I mean, sure, it's different from your usual Star Wars aesthetic, but how it fits into maybe George Lucas's, aesthetic.
Yeah, the first thing I thought about was, have you guys seen lowrider bikes? They're like a lot. They're like in your face, glitter. It's called Candy Paint. It's like a brand that's super glittery. And they stand out on the street. This entire urban environment of the US is asphalt and concrete. And you have these little bikes, these lowrider cars too, that are just a huge amount of color. And they're kind of a personalized vehicle. The whole point of it is that they're not stock. They're made to be something cool that you can enjoy, that makes everything more beautiful. I argue makes the street nicer. That was the first thing I thought of when I watched it, was that these kids must be trying to make it look nicer, look distinctive, so they have a cohesive aesthetic together. The other thing I thought of was those Bosuzoku Japanese gang bikes. Have you seen those?
No.
They have a lot of really bright color. They're known for this like crazy long like exhaust that's like very impractical and dangerous. And they're just like a 3-foot exhaust behind it that's chromed. But the first thing I thought was like motorcycle gang. This is a motorcycle gang, right? They're either trying to customize themselves out of something, like to be a unique, cohesive group, or to be intimidating, like the biker gang. Yeah,
I think it's kind of both. There's the cute end of it, of being like a Vespa club.
Yeah.
They've got the shiny chrome and these cool colors. But at the same time, they're also a biker gang. These things are, I'm sure when you get out on a flat thing, they can just open up and
go fast. Yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, it's an extension of their personality. They're mods. They have cybernetic parts and stuff. They want to stand out.
Well, in that case, it does exactly what it's supposed to do, right?
Especially on Tatooine, which is just like literally all sand and sand colored things. These people dress differently and sharply. They have their droid parts. They have these shiny bikes. Like, to me, it all fit. So.
Yeah, that's like a youth movement, right? Of
and
course, a youth movement on Tatooine would be like that, right?
And very much like George Lucas's aesthetic from, the 50s. Like, you have the chrome and...
Right.
Well, like a hot rod or, paint job would have like flames and it would be bright. It would be more beat up, I guess, than that. But it looked different, They're trying to distinguish themselves.
Well, and I was thinking, I don't know enough about Robert Rodriguez's aesthetic, but he was the person in charge of Book of Boba Fett. I don't know enough about his background or whatever, and I don't generally watch some of his other scary movies or whatever, but I'm curious now if it's along the lines of his aesthetic, and I would have recognized it if I watched other Robert Rodriguez movies. But yeah, it worked enough for me. I remember so much hate. I mean, for the show in general, because everyone had an idea about what Book of Boba Fett should be. But then also it was like, oh, these Gen Zers and their shiny bikes, So I figured we had to at least cover it.
Yeah, talking about it as like a youth subculture totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not that familiar with the director either, but I feel like if he has any knowledge of car customization or bike customization, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just because I hate Tatooine and I'm so tired of going there. But like, I'm always perfectly happy to see something that doesn't match the Tatooine aesthetic. Because I'm like, because if you saw those bikes, and those like neon levels of Coruscant, would anyone have given them a second thing? And if you're a kid who wishes they lived in Coruscant, but you don't, you live on Tatooine, you know.
That's such a good point. Yeah, totally.
Wow. Yeah. Although now I think our sponsorship from the Tatooine Tourism Board just...
Oh, good job, Melissa. They're pulling all their money.
Hey, they don't need me. Everyone else, people just keep going back to Tatooine. It's okay.
No, but if it was on Coruscant, it would totally blend in on the levels. Like you see Bail Organa's airspeeder is very much the red and chrome look. And then when Anakin and Obi-Wan are chasing Zam Wesell, they've got maybe not as bright garish colors, but you look at those in the light, they're like yellows and green and orange. And so it's very sports car colors.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's just so many more people, so there's so many more kinds of unique features of cars. A lot of that customization is in urban environments because there's so many types of people there.
So if you had a Star Wars vehicle, how would you customize it to fit you?
You mean if I was a character?
Yeah.
Well, I always wanted to be a Jedi, so... Like I would find an old vehicle, like a retro vehicle from Star Wars, and then I'd resto mod it so it would all look original on the outside, but it would function like a more modern vehicle.
You'd soup it up the way like Han soups up the Falcon. That is like, it doesn't look like much on the outside. At the same time, it's like, got the fastest hyperdrive.
No, I think I'd just make it like, it would look stock. It just would look normal. And then it would maybe not even perform nicely, but it would perform more modern. notes. So like say they got some kind of new navigation system that made it so you didn't need your screen anymore finally. It would have an advanced, safety modifications. Like that's what I would do with a car now. So I guess maybe I would get like one of the cool shiny Naboo ships or whatever, and then make it, Empire resistant.
I should have also sent you the sequence. So maybe it was even in Book of Boba Fett, or was it in The Mandalorian where they fix up? Yeah, there's like a whole montage.
They fix them up? It's true?
They fix a Naboo fighter.
No way! I swear I didn't know that before.
They rip off all the yellow and then let's just put stronger engines.
So they liked the design. That's also such a car thing to do, right? They just liked the design and they wanted to still use it, right? Because it's beautiful. It was probably well engineered. It's like a 30s Chrysler, but they made it like work in the time period when they're using it.
Yeah. No, I don't know why I didn't think of sending you that clip earlier, because it was a whole little montage of like, oh, pass me the whatever Star Wars wrench. And, the whole thing of, they found this doesn't run anymore Naboo starfighter somewhere on Tatooine. And
I love that. Naboo has such a like ancient civilization kind of feel. So they found a ship from this elegant, aesthetically pleasing civilization.
I'll send you a clip after, and we'll put it maybe in the show notes too for anyone else who hasn't watched all of the content, because there is so much and maybe they have other things to do. That's a fun one. There's also a mechanic character who I've been considering cosplaying from the Mandalorian series that I really enjoy.
Is it their ship, the mechanic's ship?
I think the mechanic is the one at least who finds the ship. I think, just in like a scrapyard or something like that.
Cool.
But,
cool.
She and the Mandalorian soup it up so it becomes his new ship when he loses his previous ship. You know where the droid socket is on the Naboo fighter?
Yeah.
They put a glass dome over that so that Baby Yoda can sit in there and look out.
Yeah, it's like the little car seat.
Really funny.
Total car seat.
Aww.
Then there's a tunnel. He can crawl through it so he can sit on Mandalorian's lap.
Yeah. Well, we didn't talk about pod racers either. That's another thing that, even seeing it when I first saw that movie and hated it, you definitely notice.
What are you even doing on this show?
Oh, come on. No one else.
Just kidding.
I would say no one else went to episode 1 and was a little disappointed. Come on.
I feel like the pod racing is kind of cool in it.
The pod racing.
Even though Anakin's annoying. I was just thinking about him this morning. Poor little kid Anakin. Yeah.
Right. But those are all very different. They're in a race against each other. These aren't stock cars, I guess, what I'm picturing. Like it's not a NASCAR race where I'm speaking out of turn. I don't know. I think NASCAR cars are all the same, question mark?
There's like rules. So pod racing seems like there are not tons of rules, I would say, because they do really messed up stuff to each other. The different size of engines, the different number, like all of that can be really different, it seems like, in the pod race that we see, at least. And it does sort of, again, fit in with the personality and obviously like the budget of each individual team. Yeah. So well, it's more of like the early kind of, before all these racing divisions. So the reason racing divisions and racing companies now, basically, the reason they became cohesive is because it was like safer than doing it on your own. And rules also make it safer. So it was about being fair and being safe. And it seems like they have like, maybe not, they're not that fair, but they're a little scrappier maybe. So they're like the early on racing. So they're like those salt flats racers where they're just trying to go as fast as they possibly can go at any cost, to modify things just to go extreme speeds. The pod racing is such a classic car racing thing, right? And Anakin being good at it from, using the Force. It's funny that he's making this like race car driving Force sort of connection, I think. Like you need the Force to be a good driver, and a good pilot. George Lucas himself wanted to race cars at some point. And then he got in a really bad car accident when he was young in a very weird car. It's like basically a Fiat, but it had a different name. Then he instead decided to pursue the safer field of cinema filmmaking.
And certainly nothing about the pod race we see is safe or fair. And I would think that would be one of those times that you like, Jedi or people strong with the Force don't get to be in this race, right?
Yeah.
Like you would be a separate division, right?
Well, but then
we
have Force division.
Like, some species that just have faster reflexes,
right?
Like, maybe Doug's like Sebulba, they do have faster reflexes.
Right.
Or you look at like some of the ones that just have more fingers and it's like they can hit more buttons faster.
Who's to say that you can't do force enhancing drugs when you're doing pod racing?
That's right.
Doping with midichlorians.
Well, I'm just now thinking like, if you're not a Jedi, you could use the Force on your opponent's pods. You're just like, oops,
yeah.
that thing broke.
Yeah.
Or oops, your steering wheel just turned right into that column.
Absolutely. Anakin would do something like that too. So yeah, interesting.
Well, are there any other, movies that have what you think are really good car chase or use of vehicles?
Honestly, American Graffiti is a pretty fun movie car-wise. You could tell it's like an homage to how much he loves that era of cars. I think it's set in the 60s, but it has a lot of like 50s cars. I also personally love the Pixar movie Cars, even though it's kind of weird. Yeah.
No, I love it too. My daughter got into it and she just like immediately fell in love with it. And so I know a lot about cars. It's
just an interesting way of looking at, I don't know, like the development of the road system in the US, how their little town is kind of left aside from Route 66, right?
We had big discussions on the growth of towns in Route 66, and like we did a road trip out to Arizona, and we went by Seligman, Arizona, which is where Radiator Springs would be located.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Where Route 66 rejoins with 10.
Yeah, we did a trip like that just before the pandemic too, where we drove Route 66 from Santa Monica as far as we could get in like a couple days just into Arizona, and then came home literally and watched Cars that night.
Oh, that's so cool.
And it was like so much more poignant after like seeing that.
Yeah, it's really cool. It shows a lot of kinds of car culture, but in a cute like kids way, right? Because he's a NASCAR racer too. And then it has Sally Portia. She's like kind of a fancier lady.
Yeah, and then the lowriders, and
I always like the little the Fiat too.
Guido and Luigi.
Yeah, Guido and Luigi.
Yeah.
Well, tell us, do you have a favorite Star Wars character?
When I was little, I loved Han Solo the best. In the prequel era, I really liked all the new Jedi. I thought they were really cool. I thought Qui-Gon Jinn was awesome. And I see now there's cartoons of a lot of the cool Jedi, which is like, gotta get my kids on that so I could watch it, I guess.
Yeah.
And obviously Boba Fett's really cool. Oh yeah, I was gonna talk about Boba Fett's ship too.
Go for it.
Oh yeah.
Something I always liked about it was that you don't see other ships like that in the series. I thought it was funny that you find out later that he's like literally been cloned, but he's unique, right? He sort of made his own customized ship too, but it's a little bit less flashy even than Han Solo's. Yeah, that was all.
Well, how did you get into being a curator? And if someone, is interested in working in an automotive museum, what would you recommend?
So I just studied not cars, but regular curatorial stuff. So I did art history in my undergrad, which always has a component of like, creating an exhibit, which is one of the important things that you do as a curator. And then I went to grad school for arts and heritage management. My thesis work was about heritage sites and buildings. So I guess at my first museum job that was like not an internship, they were looking for people that didn't have car background, and it was at the Peterson Museum in LA. So I would say if you want to work in a car museum, maybe just study museums first and then just try to work in a car museum. Because I think fundamentally they wanted someone that didn't have a bias. Like if you're super passionate about cars, you have a bias toward or against something. And then also there's just the regular, all museums with collections have the same kind of curatorial work, building the collection, keeping it safe, showing it, and then all the paperwork that goes behind that. Definitely get good at writing if you're interested in doing this specific kind of work at any museum, because that's 90% of your job.
Well, do you have a social media presence, or is it just something we should follow the museum?
Yeah, so our website is sdautomuseum.org. You can see, our hours and stuff, but also our cool upcoming exhibits.
What's coming up?
Opening in June, we have two super cool things. One of them is going to be called The Power of Porsche, and it's just locally tied Porsche exhibit. So we're only getting cars from this region, Southern California. And we're talking about the conversation between, unlikely conversation between Stuttgart and Southern California in terms of what people want here, because this is a huge market for Porsches. We're also having kind of a continuing lowrider series. We already have permanent lowrider installation that rotates every couple of weeks, but we're doing a bigger exhibit kind of in our main area with the Black Lowrider Association of San Diego. That's going to be about the history of lowriding in the Black communities of San Diego. So that's also opening in June for Juneteenth.
Cool.
Our Instagram is San Diego Auto Museum. And then our Facebook is San Diego Automotive Museum.
Nice. We'll make sure we put links to that in our show notes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on Star Warsologies, Maria.
Yeah, it was super fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, this is great to talk about. I'm always excited to watch more Star Wars, but now I feel like I'll notice even more the car culture or whatever equivalent. And I think I might watch American Graffiti tonight because I was trying to decide what movie to watch.
Yeah, awesome. Let me know what you think.
That wraps up this episode of Star Warsologies. We want to thank our guest, Maria Romano de León, and we want to thank all of you for listening.
So if you're looking for the links we might have talked about, check out our show notes page. That's at skywalkingthrough-neverland.com/star-warsologies. And also check out the Star Warsologies YouTube channel where we're posting most of our episodes and some with related visuals.
If you have an idea for a topic for Star Warsologies or know an expert we should interview, let us know at Star Warsologies on Instagram and X, formerly Twitter, or at starwarsologies@gmail.com. That's StarWarsologies. We also have our fan group on Facebook. Come join us there, chat with us and your fellow listeners. It's the Star Warsologies podcast fan group.
Please also rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite service, and share this episode with your car-loving friends.
No topic is off limits, even if the annual celebration on the Caretaker's planet is called Oktoberfest.
It's beautiful, actually. I love it.
Thank you, Melissa.
We are part of the Skywalking Network, where you can also find a variety of other great shows about Star Wars, Disney, and Marvel, including the Max FX podcast, the Neverland Clubhouse, and the flagship show, Skywalking Through Neverland. They also have a YouTube show called Today in Star Wars History. You can find all of that at skywalkingnetwork.com.
See you next time on Star Warsologies.
I was about to say, did we make it through the whole episode without a pun? But no. Perfect timing. Vroom!
Vroom.